I have to confess, when I signed up for this week to deliver the sermon, I have to confess, between Pride and GA, I thought there were going to be 12 people here, so. It is, however, very, very, very nice to see you all. Our musical offering this morning, sung so beautifully by Maddie Tuning, is from a contemporary musical called Dear Evan Hansen. In the musical, the protagonist, Evan Hansen, is an isolated high school student who suffers from severe social anxiety. The song we heard, Waving Through a Window, is the second number in the play and expresses Evan's deep longing for human connection. His lines, "On the outside, always looking in, will I ever be more than I've always been?" speak to the nearly universal fear of feeling left out. In my work and in my life, I have both seen and felt the effects of isolation and loneliness. These effects have been particularly profound in my work, where many of the families involved in the child protection system are struggling with issues of mental illness, substance abuse, household and community violence, and poverty, all of which tend to increase isolation and disconnection. Our response in child protection has traditionally been to send parents to programs and classes and expect them to change their lives in the process. What we are learning, though, is that families need networks to help them ensure child safety. One of my child protection colleagues has flipped the script on working with foster youth who will emancipate from the system without reuniting with family. Instead of preparing these youth for independent living, as we have traditionally liked to call it, my friend says that we need to prepare them for interdependent living. This got me thinking about the difference between independence and interdependence. The dominant paradigm in the United States prizes independence. This imbalanced focus on individualism has contributed significantly to the isolation and loneliness experienced by the fictitious Evan Hansen and by countless real folks in our society. So this morning, I'm going to explore a continuum from independence to interdependence. And I'm going to share why practicing interdependence is a radical act of resistance and a powerful tool for spiritual growth. Boy, that sounds lofty, doesn't it? Whew. You can tell me after the service if I met those goals. When I was a child, messages about the worth of independence and individualism were everywhere. If you want something done right, do it yourself, was an early and constant message that other people were inherently incompetent and untrustworthy. Stand on your own 2 feet made it seem shameful to collaborate with others or to ask for help. In the culture of my own household growing up, these messages were refined through our own specific lens on independence. Our family was part of a larger network of friends through church and community ties, and though we valued these connections with others, we were frequently the givers and helpers. While it was expected that we would give to those in need, being the recipient was to be avoided. One story from my childhood comes to mind. I've spoken of my father's mother, my granny, before. When I was in high school, there was this big church celebration dinner. I don't remember what the actual celebration was about, but one agenda item for this dinner was honoring Granny for her service to the church. Now, throughout my youth, Granny gave tremendously to our church community. She was the kind of person who cooked, served, and cleaned up weekly Wednesday night dinners, weeded and watered and pruned the rose gardens, baked cookies and made candies and Christmas ornaments for the fundraisers, and visited and prayed and brought food when friends were sick. So at this dinner, after a little speech, they tried to get her up on the stage in the fellowship hall to receive the plaque they'd had made for the occasion, but Granny hid out in the kitchen. We finally got her to come up and accept the plaque, but she hated every minute of it. Now, I've always thought of this event as a reflection of who Granny was and what she believed. She did not enjoy the spotlight. She wanted to be behind the scenes, filling a need, going unnoticed. She also wanted to find favor with Jesus, both in this life and after her death. She must have told me 1,000 times while I was growing up, and I probably have said this to you too, that Jesus loves a cheerful giver. But reflecting on this memory now, in the context of interdependence, it's shocking just how neatly Granny's aversion to recognition fits within the messages of the American view of independence. I'll get back to this in just a bit. First, though, I want to pause and take a moment to define our terms. Thinking about our 7th principle, which affirms respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part, led me to musing on the word interdependent and resulted in this idea of a continuum of behavior from independence to interdependence. So I've talked about independence, but I haven't defined it. According to Merriam-Webster, independence is the state of being free from outside control, not depending on another's authority. Now, through the lens of her faith, my granny resisted the accolades of the congregation. She feared that by gaining recognition for her service to God, she might become dependent upon what others thought of her. If that happened, she would no longer be free from outside control, and instead of serving God, she would be serving her ego to gain favor with her community. In other words, her attempt to deflect the praise from her faith family was a billboard proclaiming her independence. Even though Granny valued independence, she truly was quite interconnected, which is the next point along this continuum. It may well be that interconnection is the spot on the continuum where many of us stop. Before I started preparing this sermon, I thought interconnection was the destination. If connection is about the links or associations between things, interconnection is about mutual connections between things. Friendships are based on interconnection. I love ice cream. You love ice cream. Let's be friends, right? Interconnection is vital in social justice activism. We have a common purpose and we work together toward a common goal. I love universal human liberation. You love universal human liberation. Let's be friends. Interconnection is important. We need people and spaces in which we can be seen for who we are and comforted and supported when times are tough. In its simplest form, according to Merriam-Webster, interconnection means to connect with one another. Interconnection is what we do here each Sunday. We greet each other, sing together, give financially to support those things in which we believe, and we take time to consider that which has worth. And yet, we can go farther. There is one more stop along this continuum before we arrive at interdependence, and that is codependency. The term originated in the world of substance abuse treatment and initially was used to refer to the partner or family member of someone dependent on alcohol or other substances. Now, it's often used to describe any relationship that has become unhealthy or toxic, any relationship characterized by putting someone else's needs before one's own. Our deep desire to find these points of interconnection with others can sometimes result in denying our own views, preferences, and needs in order to maintain the connections we've established. In my own life, I've identified 2 sources for my own codependent behavior when it arises. The first is that I desperately want to ease the suffering of others. I have a tendency to want to fix things. The other root of my codependency is a disconnection from myself, not knowing what I want or need, and not viewing myself as valuable or worthy of having those needs met. This last point leads me, finally, to being ready to define interdependence, what it is, why it's hard, and why it's worthwhile. My old friend Merriam-Webster defines interdependent as dependent on one another, mutually dependent. In the natural world, interdependence is seen in the relationship between the butterfly and the flower. The butterfly relies on the flower for nectar, while the flower relies on the butterfly to pollinate and make seeds to produce more plants. It seems like such a simple concept. So why is it so hard to do in practice? Interdependence is hard because it requires several things from us. Things that may be the exact opposite of the messages we've internalized about the value of individualism. Interdependence requires honesty, transparency, asking for help, knowing one's own needs, being in relationship, and giving what is asked for. Interdependence requires that we take turns being givers and receivers. Thinking back to our web of connection during the Time for All Ages, sometimes we had people who didn't hold on to the yarn. And what happened? It was sort of a form of catch. When we don't allow ourselves to receive, when we focus on just the giving half of the equation, it is a form of passing the buck. Not allowing ourselves to recognize and acknowledge our dependence on others denies our full humanity. It is a false superiority, and it denies others the opportunity to receive the gifts of giving. Interdependence requires engaging in practices that help us acknowledge and identify our own needs. Practices that involve quieting the mental chatter and connecting with spirit, for instance, are terrific for any of us who struggle acknowledging our own needs or who struggle with codependent behavior. For some of us, just identifying those needs is the hard part. For others, the obstacle to interdependence is being able to state those needs out loud and ask for help. Interdependence also requires us to be in relationship with one another. In our fast-paced world, the nature of our relationships has changed. When I was a child, my granny would talk on the phone with friends and family every day. Her phone seemed to be ringing constantly. In my own household today, phone calls are a rare occurrence. We generally keep in touch with family and friends through texts and emails. As a result, the nature of our relationships is different. Granny's friends and relatives shared news, okay, gossip. But they also shared their joys and sorrows, often in real time. And connecting voice to voice across the telephone line meant it was harder to apply an everything's just fine filter to the sharing of their lives. Social media, for some of us, has truly changed what, when, and how we share our lives with one another. So much goes unspoken about the trials and tribulations of our lives. So many people are hurting inside but choose not to show it, both online and in the real world. Many of us, like Evan Hansen, are tapping on the glass of our smartphones, waving through a window across a digital abyss, showing only the filtered versions of ourselves. Is that being in relationship? Interdependence is also hard because it requires us to really listen to what others need and to give them what they ask for rather than what we think they might benefit from. Recently, I was going through a hard time and I actually reached out and made a phone call. Listen, I said to the person on the other end, I'm not looking for advice. What I really need is someone just to listen. And to their credit, they did. For a while. And then, bless them, I think they just couldn't help themselves. They started giving advice exactly what I told them I didn't want. And this gets back to the heart of why interdependence is hard. In addition to all those things I've said before, people are going to let us down. There's no way around it. We are human. We will make mistakes. In the giving and the receiving, we will mess up from time to time. Our work is not to believe the old lie that says, if you want something right, do it yourself. Our work is to stay in relationship, have the hard conversations, repair the ruptures, and recognize that we need one another to survive. Interdependence isn't important in spite of being hard. It's important because it's hard. Growth is painful. One of my favorite quotes is by Cynthia Ocelli, who writes, "For a seed to achieve its greatest expression, it must come completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes. To someone who doesn't understand growth, it would look like complete destruction." It's a good one, huh? Humans have evolved as social creatures, relying on one another for survival. When we deny our interdependence, we stagnate. But we do so out of an aversion to pain. We want to be comfortable. We want to avoid the pain of destruction and change, but this prevents us from our highest calling, our greatest expression. Being in relationship and practicing interdependence pushes us toward our promise and our potential. Finally, practicing interdependence is important because it is itself a form of resistance. Practicing interdependence can aid in dismantling patriarchy and white supremacy culture. The dominant paradigm in the United States, the paradigm that so highly values rugged individualism, has, for centuries now, devalued the contributions of people of color, the LGBT+ community, and women. Interdependence is often prized and practices in spaces in which individuals are marginalized or oppressed. In these spaces, members find connections with one another and recognize on a deep level that survival of the individual is utterly linked with the survival of the whole. When all of us recognize our dependence upon one another, we will no longer tolerate the worship of individual independence. We will see the hollow promises were nothing but fool's gold, and we will not fall for them anymore. There's one last term I must define and explore together this morning. The title for this sermon was conceived in opposition to the term rugged individualism. So what does rugged mean? Again, according to Merriam-Webster, rugged means strongly built or constituted, robust. This definition gives me hope, for it reminds me of Reverend Leslie's charge to us to have a thick faith. Practicing interdependence both requires strength and provides it. Interdependence is thicker, more robust than interconnectedness. It makes demands of us, but its rewards are more than worth it. So how do we begin to practice interdependence? I have 4 questions for you to consider today. And my hope is that these questions can help you reflect on where you stand on both sides of the interdependence equation, the giving and the receiving. The first question is, what do you need? Spend some time in meditation and contemplation and identify those things you cannot do on your own. Acknowledge that you have needs and that you need others to help you. The second question, who do you need? You might find that you need others who understand and know you well. Perhaps you need new connections to help you broaden your perspective and understanding of the world. Maybe you need folks who share a common purpose and vision and are undertaking work that you can join. Identifying and defining for yourself what qualities and characteristics others have that will help you to grow can be a great step toward practicing interdependence. The third question, now focusing on the giving side of interdependence, is what do you have to give? There are so many needs to fill these days, it can feel exhausting and unrelenting. Be honest with yourself and clear about what your capacity is for giving. Give what you can and where you can, but do not run yourself into the ground. No one can depend on you or help you practice interdependence if you are denying your own needs for rest, rejuvenation, and renewal. If you have nothing left to give, head on back to those first two questions and receive for a while. In helping yourself, you will help the rest of us. The fourth and final question is this: what from you specifically does the world need? Your life experiences have provided you with a specific set of skills and perspectives that the world needs. Truly. What do you have to offer on which others can depend? Whatever it is, we need it. We need you. In 2017, the director and activist Michael Moore reflected on a profound lesson he'd learned as a participant in high school music classes. This is something I've experienced too, and I think it wraps up beautifully why interdependence is so important, particularly now. Moore writes, sometimes in band or choir, music requires players or singers to hold a note longer than they can actually hold a note. In those cases, we were taught to mindfully stagger when we took a breath so that the sound appeared uninterrupted. Everyone got to breathe, and the music stayed strong and vibrant. In the face of the onslaught of negative action, let's remember music. Take a breath. The rest of the chorus will sing. The rest of the band will play. Rejoin so others can breathe. Together, we can sustain a very long, beautiful song for a very, very long time. You don't have to do it all, but you must add your voice to the song. That is the end of the quote. Let us depend on one another wholeheartedly, radically, honestly. And as we add our voices to one final song together this morning, let us join together in spirit and in action